The king began to question Alice, and Alice said she didn't know anything. The king wanted to expel Alice from the courtroom, saying that she was too tall, violating the oldest rule in the book. Alice was not happy about this. At this point, the White Rabbit produced a letter, claiming it was written by a certain criminal to someone. The king said, "It must be so unless it isn't written to anyone, which wouldn't make sense." "A criminal should write to someone," one of the jurors asked. "Who was the letter written to?" The White Rabbit, while unfolding the paper, said, "It wasn't written to anyone. In fact, there's no address on the outside." "It's not a letter at all, it's a poem," another juror asked. "Is it the criminal's notes then?" "No, it's strange. It's an imitation of someone else's notes," the White Rabbit replied. At this point, the jurors were all puzzled. The king said he must have imitated someone else's notes. The jurors finally realized this. Then the knight spoke up, saying, "Your Majesty, I didn't write this. They can't prove I wrote it." "There's no signature at the end," the king said. "If you didn't sign it, that only makes you more suspicious. It means you're crafty, otherwise, you should have signed your name like an honest person." This statement drew applause, as it was the king's first clever remark of the day. "This proves his guilt," the queen said, but Alice said, "This doesn't prove anything. You don't even know what this poem is about. Read it aloud." She ordered the king. The king said, "White Rabbit, put on your glasses," read it from start to finish, and then stop. The White Rabbit proceeded to read the poem. "They said you first hurt him, then hurt him again, then mentioned me, gave me a good review, but said I couldn't swim." The king wiped his hands and said, "This is the most powerful evidence I've heard. Now, jurors, if any of you can understand the meaning of this poem, I'm willing to give 60 shillings as a reward." "I believe this poem is utterly meaningless." "I think so too, it's completely meaningless," Alice said. As she was now quite tall and not afraid to speak up, the jurors all wrote on their cardboard, "We believe this poem is meaningless." But none of them attempted to explain the meaning of the poem. If it's meaningless, then it saves us a lot of trouble because we don't need to understand it. "We don't understand it anyway," the king said, spreading the poem on his knee, looking at it with one eye. "I finally understand some of it now. He can't swim. This is referring to you, right?" the king asked the knight. The knight sadly shook his head and said, "Do I look like I can swim? I'm made of stiff paper. Of course, I can't swim now. It's all clear to me," the king continued. Then loudly recited the poem again. "We know this is no lie. Of course, that refers to the jurors. I gave him 1. They gave him 2. That obviously means the stolen pies. Is that so?" Alice asked. "Yes, there's nothing clearer than this," the king proudly said, pointing at the pies on the table. "Then it says, they all returned from him to you. Yes, all the pies are here. Nothing could be more obvious," the king continued. "It's the verses he had. Dear, I suppose you've never read verses, have you?" He turned to the queen and asked, "Never." The queen angrily replied and grabbed the ink bottle from the table, throwing it at Bill the lizard. Poor Bill had already stopped trying to write with his fingers on the cardboard, as he found it impossible to write. But now, he hurriedly continued writing with ink on his face. What happened next?